We're going to get more into the Sixers conversation right now, get more details on if the Sixers trade Ben Simmons, how does that happen? Well, the man to talk to about that, he's been joining us each and every week throughout the NBA postseason, and we appreciate him joining us again. It is Bryan Toporek. He's the co-host of the NBA podcast, and he's also a writer for Forbes Sports covering the NBA. And he joins us right now on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. And, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I'm saying this because, as I was telling the audience earlier, I want them to see what I see, Bryan, okay? And just like a couple doesn't talk about a divorce unless they already think about being separated, there was no reason why the Sixers to have conversations about Ben Simmons' future, as they called it, with Rich Paul, unless they were already thinking about moving on. And that after weeks of rumor and speculation, now we have basically two of the four biggest NBA insiders on the planet just dropping two massive reports on Ben Simmons and the Sixers today. So before we get into any of the real details, what was your reaction to the reports that came down today?
Honestly, not surprised. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're at least going to shop him. They shopped him for James Harden. Daryl Morey is not married to Ben Simmons. He's proved already, even before this playoff collapse, that if he sees an opportunity to upgrade the roster, that he will. I think if anything, if you're hoping that they don't sell him for pennies on the dollar, the report from Shams Charania of The Athletic should be encouraging, because that report said, Ben Simmons still has a lot of interest around the league. He still has value. It's not like teams are going to offer a top 55 protected second round pick for Ben Simmons. They're going to get something back in return. And B, they said if Morey doesn't get the offer that he wants, he might just be willing to stand pat.
Well, we have to think, though, Bryan, that the part of that report probably came from somebody in the Sixers organization, right? That's them putting out in the public that Morey isn't going to trade him for a bag of peanuts and just let you all know, I'm not taking anything less than the best you can offer. So part of that might be also a little posturing through the media. We know how this stuff works. People need to understand that some of these reports are put out there because people on different sides of a conversation are trying to accelerate some of those conversations with the other people, to let them know how serious they are.
Yeah, it's always a fun game to decipher who leaked to who or where these reports are coming from, because there are certain paragraphs that are like, okay, that is just directly from the team, or that is directly from Ben and his agent. So figuring that out is always a fun game at this time of year. But you're totally right. I mean, this is coming from somewhere, whether it's the Sixers, Simmons and his camp, or the other teams involved. They might be leaking this information as well to let other teams know, hey, if you're trying to trade for Ben Simmons, we're in this too. Or if you're trying to trade for some of our players, well, we're thinking about trading for Ben Simmons, so get your best offers in now, because the NBA draft is coming up, free agency is coming up in a couple weeks. This is the time that if it's going to happen, it'll probably be in these next few weeks.
Now, before we break down each team, I want you to describe something that you explained in your Forbes Sports piece, which is you were explaining how in order for a trade like this to happen, the money has to match. So before we get to the teams, can you explain that for the audience that maybe doesn't fully understand how NBA economics work? Because this is something that is very much a part of this situation.
Yeah, so because Ben is earning, $30+ million, the Sixers they can't get back, or they can't get back a ton more or a ton less than what they're sending out. So they can get 125% plus $100,000 in terms of salary that they're taking back. But the sign and trade is where things get even more complicated. For a guy like Kyle Lowry, let's say they want to bring in Kyle Lowry, but they don't want to give up Ben, Tobias, or Embiid. It's almost impossible to do that, because if you get a guy via sign and trade, you aren't allowed to exceed a certain amount of money. It's called the apron. It's going to be about $143 million. And the math just will not work out for the Sixers to keep those three guys, bring in Kyle Lowry if he's getting a $20-25 million salary, and then rounding out the rest of the roster as well. So, back in April or so, I think it was, The Athletic reported, the Sixers are still interested in Kyle Lowry. And I didn't put much stock into it at the time because I thought this is basically impossible if they keep their big three. Well, now that we know Simmons is, very much available, I think there are more avenues to create a Kyle Lowry sign and trade in particular.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, at B Toporek on Twitter, the NBA podcast co-host, also NBA contributor for Forbes Sports. Now, the other part of what you write about is this might not be a mano-a-mano deal here. And this is where I think the Toronto situation is interesting. Because, Brian, based on the reporting at the deadline, the Raptors wanted Maxey and Thibault and picks, right? So that doesn't sound like to me the Raptors are like volunteering, like, we desperately want Ben Simmons. So to me, this could be a situation where we know the Timberwolves, quote unquote, desperately want him, right? We know that there's numerous speculation that the Kings are salivating over him, that the Cavs want him, the Pelicans have called, the Warriors have called, right? So if all these teams are calling, could Toronto be the proxy to make the deal happen so the Sixers get the return they want and maybe they don't have to deal with the draft picks that maybe Toronto and the other teams want?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly probably the best case scenario for the Sixers this offseason because I don't think Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, Zach LaVine, those are the guys that you'd like to target in a Ben Simmons trade. I don't expect any of them to move this
Really quick,
offseason.
I don't mean to interrupt you. You mentioned Damian Lillard. I got to ask you this question. I just brought this up earlier. Why would Toronto hire Chauncey Billups, the guy that Lillard wanted, and then trade him? I don't understand why people don't. Am I just stupid? Like, am I the only person who sees this? That like Lillard was like, I want Jason Kidd or Chauncey Billups, and Toronto's like, here's Chauncey Billups, and then Portland would trade him. I don't understand how people don't make that connection here.
Right, and he's under contract for a couple more seasons, too. They have no incentive to trade him unless he says, I'm not showing up for camp, and that's just not going to happen. Damian Lillard's not that type of guy, which is why I don't think he's available. I think a guy like C.J. McCollum is, but for the Sixers, if you're trading Ben Simmons, you need a lead guard back. You need a point guard back. Are you going to trust C.J. McCollum as your de facto point guard? C.J. is a great player, but that just isn't going to work out. Like, you need to get the ball to Joel Embiid for Joel Embiid to be as dominant as he is. And for all of Ben Simmons' faults, he is a great playmaker. He's a great facilitator, great in transition. So, I'm targeting a point guard as one of my main returns in a Ben Simmons trade, but teams aren't going to give up a good young point guard for him. I don't think they will. I mean, like I've heard, De'Aaron Fox floated out there. I don't think Sacramento trades De'Aaron Fox for Ben Simmons. I don't see why they would. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is another guy who has at least come up in the rumor mill this offseason. Again, I don't know why OKC is making that move. I'm not trading Ben Simmons for a Kemba Walker, who has plenty of injury concerns.
No.
So I think, there are a lot of free agent point guards this offseason. Lowry's the big name. Mike Conley, Lonzo Ball, Dennis Schroeder, who I would not touch, Spencer Dinwiddie. So I think the sign and trade is the best possible route if they're going to trade him this offseason to get a point guard in return. But yeah, I think Toronto could be that third team where you send Simmons to Minnesota. Minnesota sends some stuff to Toronto, sends some stuff to Philly, and then Toronto sends Lowry to Philly. Because if Toronto's perspective, yeah, they were asking for the moon at the trade deadline, but now Lowry's a free agent. And if he says, look, I want to go to Philly, I want you guys to work out the sign and trade, but if you're not willing to, I can just go sign with the Knicks, or I can sign with the Heat, or I can sign with the Mavericks, and you guys are going to lose me for nothing. Then the Raptors have to ask themselves, well, which do we prefer? Sending Lowry to Philly and getting something back in return, but knowing we're going to have to face this guy in our division, or just let him walk and go to one of these other teams. And, we don't have to at least worry about him in our division, but we lose that talent for nothing. And we don't have a way to replace him.
And by the way, we also know that the reports were that Lowry and Masai Ujiri are been talking about this. Like, they've already been having these conversations about, like, hey, Kyle, what do you want? Where do you want to go? And the report was that Kyle wants to go somewhere to try to win one more title, right? So I'm assuming that there's already a groundwork here for those conversations to be had. It's not like this is just coming out of the blue here. That's why I think the Lowry thing right now makes the most sense. Who the other team is, I don't know. Because here's the thing with Minnesota, Brian. The one report that came out is Minnesota will trade anyone that's like Karl Anthony Towns or D'Angelo Russell. And I'm like, okay, so basically you took your two biggest pieces off the board. And
right.
Also, would they really trade Anthony Edwards after his amazing season? Like, I just feel like there's so much of this smoke coming out of Minnesota. Like, does Minnesota even know what they're doing?
Right. Right. I mean, I don't think Anthony Edwards would be obtainable for Ben. And so that's the thing. It's like Minnesota wants Ben Simmons, but doesn't want to give up any of his three best players. There is no package that makes sense for Philly if you're just doing a two-team deal. Malik Beasley is a great player, but Malik Beasley, Ricky Rubio.
I don't know about a great player. He's a good player.
Yeah, he would be nice in Philly. Right. So if you do a three-team trade where you send Beasley and Lowry to Philly, and Minnesota sends like Ricky Rubio and Jaden McDaniels or Ricky Rubio and a pick to Toronto, so Lowry isn't gone for nothing. That's the type of framework that could make sense. I think Philly would still want more than that, but that's the idea behind a multi-team trade rather than just a straight up Minnesota for Philly, where there's no compelling offer Minnesota could create without one of its three best players.
Well, the other problem, Brian, is remember they don't have their first round pick this year. Right. That's in Golden State. So Minnesota to me is like the least likely team right now to be able to make a trade work. I feel like Sacramento, okay, I can see a couple scenarios, right? You have a team like Indiana, they probably want a little change up on the roster, right? A team like the Cavs, I mean, this whole Kevin Love thing, I mean, if that dude ever gets traded, I'll be semi-surprised because I feel like I've heard rumors of Kevin Love being traded for 5 years now. So,
yeah.
To me, I feel like there are other teams that could do things, and Minnesota isn't that team. And speaking of the Cavs, this is what I don't understand, Brian. Colin Sexton is probably going to be a future all-star in this league. The kid is a phenomenal talent. He's a hard worker. I mean, literally, I've never heard or read anybody say anything bad about the guy.
Right.
But yet the Cavs want to trade him? Wait, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, it sounds like, he's heading into the final year of his rookie contract right now, so he's eligible for an extension. If he doesn't sign one, he'll be a restricted free agent next offseason. It sounds like he wants a max deal or a near max deal, and the Cavs just do not want to pay that next contract. So they are trying to move off now, make that someone else's headache. But I agree with you. Colin Sexton's a great player, and Cleveland's another team that would make a ton of sense for Ben. It's just, again, assembling a competitive offer just between Cleveland and Philly is difficult to do, because I'm with you. Like, Sexton and Love for Ben does not do it for me. Someone reported the other day that that's not enough. They asked an executive, I think it was Jason Lloyd of The Athletic, brought up Sexton and Love to an executive for Ben Simmons, and the exec said, no way, Philly won't do that. They can get more. So if you can come up with some three-team permutation, again, where Cleveland is sending Sexton to Philly and stuff, and then, Simmons goes to Cleveland and Cleveland sends something to a third team and the third team sends some stuff to Philly as well. Like, there are scenarios where it makes sense. The same deal with Indiana too. I would say, I don't see why Indiana would be interested in Ben just because they already have so many front court players between Sabonis, Miles Turner, and TJ Warren. So adding another one just seems like, unless you have a separate move lined up, maybe you move off to Sabonis and then it makes more sense. But could you come up with a three-team deal where, again, Simmons goes elsewhere, that team sends stuff to Indiana, Indiana sends Malcolm Brogdon and stuff to Philly? Like, there are definitely options out there, and I'm sure Daryl Morey is exploring all of them right now. It's just, can you find a deal that makes sense for all parties?
Bryan Toporek joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, the NBA podcast. He is the co-host, also Forbes Sports NBA contributor. All right, the Ben Simmons stuff isn't going away. He ain't be traded for probably 2 weeks. So let's get to the NBA Finals. What I saw in Game 3 was it seemed like a light went off for Giannis. It was like Giannis turned around and said, you know what? I'm done caring. Like, I already cared only this much anyway. I'm not going to care anymore. I'm just going to be the guy who runs down the lane, tries to dunk on everybody. And he literally went up about a 40-10 game, consecutive games now. And I don't know if the Suns have any answer for a Giannis who wants to go down the lane without DeAndre Ayton on the floor. And we saw that without Ayton on the floor, the Suns, I mean, Cam Johnson had a nice dunk, but that was really the only thing he did the entire game when Ayton went out.
Yeah, that was the big storyline on our podcast. We recorded between games 2 and 3, and we said that's the one way that Milwaukee can get back into the series is just relentlessly attack the paint. Because without Ayton, now that Dario Saric tore his ACL is out for the playoffs, the Suns are pretty thin in the front court once Ayton leaves the floor. I think they were a minus 20 in the non-Ayton minutes the other night. I think John Hollinger, I want to say, of The Athletic tweeted that out. So Ayton got into some like early-ish foul trouble. It like picked up at the end of the first half, and then he drew his fourth one pretty quickly in the third quarter. And that's really when the game broke open for Milwaukee, and they just ran away with it. So for Ayton, it's just going to be, balancing staying aggressive defensively with not getting into foul trouble, knowing how important you are to your team. But then, for Milwaukee, it's maintaining that same offensive approach in this game 4. Don't settle for jump shots. You have a massive size advantage over this Suns team. Exploit it. That's the best thing you can do. Giannis, I agree with you. It's like he gave some comments today where he said, he doesn't really care about missing shots anymore. He's trying to lean into his weaknesses, he said, which is, something, if we want to bring it back to Ben Simmons for a second, that's something that he could really take to heart. And if he did that, he would improve substantially. But it's great to see Giannis reach this level on this stage, especially given the uncertainty about him going into the finals. We didn't even know if he was going to play a week ago, and now he's dropping 40-10 games like he's Shaquille O'Neal. It's awesome to see, and I'm glad that this series, after game 2, it looked like we were looking at Suns in 4, Suns in 5. Now all of a sudden, I still have no idea who's going to win. Looks like it's going to be a long series, and I'm very much here for it.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where I picked the Suns to win, but I wouldn't exactly be upset if Giannis won. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those deals where, like, the star players on both sides, there's no real villain here. Everybody's pretty much likable. You want Devin Booker to win. You want Giannis to win. You want Chris Paul to get his ring. You like DeAndre Ayton. Chris Middleton seems like a nice dude. Drew Holiday does a lot of charity work. Like, there's no real bad guys here. So it's like, there's a party that just, like, sits back, puts your feet up, and it's like, I'm just here for a good time, man. NBA Finals, let's go.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's like the first finals in I can't even remember how long where there's no villain.
I mean, it's got to be what, the Pistons Spurs?
Yeah, I was trying to, because like all the Warriors, Cavs, people hate the Warriors for whatever reason,
or they hate LeBron
for whatever reason. The Heat teams before that.
Don't forget, you had Kobe versus the Celtics. People pick sides with that.
Yep. I guess Cavs Spurs in 2007. But if you hated LeBron back then, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, people like to hate people no matter what. So that's what I'm saying. Spurs Pistons feels like that was the last, everybody was pretty copacetic. That was the final.
Yeah.
But that was also one of the least watched NBA finals in NBA history. So take that for whatever it's worth. Bryan Toporek joining me here on Game Night. All right, one more before I let you go. I got to talk about USA basketball because, they've lost now 2 exhibition games, which is the same amount they lost over the last, 25 plus years, right? And the reason why it's a subject to me is because I don't hate Pop. Pop's a future Hall of Famer. But when Greg Popovich gets up in front of the media and says, well, we're still trying to gel as a team. We're still trying to figure it out. And then he interrupts the reporter 20 times and goes for a follow-up because he's Popovich, and nobody can tell him to shut up or tell him to stop being a rude jerk in front of a camera, right? Or in any scenario, because I guess he's Popovich. He's got a halo over his head. So it's like, all right, I get it. Popovich is frustrated. The media has to ask questions. But at some point, don't we have to ask, was this team just built wrong? Because, if you took that starting lineup on paper and put it onto an NBA team right now, Vegas is setting the line minus 300 to win the NBA championship, right? Like, this is Durant and Damian Lillard and, like, some of the best players on earth, and you lost to Nigeria and Australia. And by the way, Australia doesn't have Ben Simmons. They don't even have their best defensive player. They have a second best defensive player, Matisse Thybulle. And it's like Matisse Thybulle is stopping Kevin Durant, for goodness sake. So what is going on with Team USA, Brian?
Yeah, so I would point to two columns I would encourage everyone to check out. One, SB Nation's Ricky O'Donnell had a piece today about the roster construction problem for Team USA. I think part of it is they're missing three players, right? Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Devin Booker are all in the NBA Finals. They will, in theory, all join the team after this series is over. That will help to some extent. But part of it is, especially this starting lineup, they're all just ISO scorers, basically. Like, you don't have a true point guard. I mean, Damian Lillard is the closest thing to it. But, I mean, again, like, their top talents, each of them, Durant, Beal, Levine, Tatum, Lillard, all of those guys are at best as scorers rather than facilitators. They can do other stuff. I'm not saying they're, pigeonholed in like a Lou Williams role here, but they don't have the chemistry that they need right now. I think that will develop in time, but that's certainly one of the problems. They lack true bigs. I mean, Bam Adebayo is their starting center. Other than that, Draymond Green, Jeremy Grant, Kevin Love, who hasn't played competitive basketball in like 3 years now. So, part of that is just the USA is kind of devoid of those high caliber bigs. All the top guys are international. Jokic, Embiid, go on down the line, Gobert. So, they had a limited pool to choose from, but that's been problematic for them. And then Chris Haynes of Yahoo Sports had a column out today explaining that they're also just struggling with the officiating. The FIBA game is called very differently than the NBA game. And those Trae Young, lunge into a guy when you're shooting, jump 5 feet in front of you to draw a foul, that doesn't get called in international basketball. So far, there have been a couple plays where the NBA guys try to draw those fouls and the refs swallow the whistle because that's how basketball should be played, and they're getting pissed about it. So as they adjust to the international style of play, I think they'll do better as they get Drew and Devin and Chris Middleton in. That's going to add some much needed toughness to this team as well. So I'm not ready to hit the panic button on this team yet, but I do think, if you're expecting them to just waltz to a gold medal, there are some really good international teams. They're in for a fight.
Yeah, I'm not expecting them to waltz. I just expect them to win at least over Nigeria. That's what I was at least expecting. I mean, and no offense to certain people that will remain anonymous, but people like Ariel Hawani, cough, cough, who's supposed to be an MMA reporter, he's watching the USA basketball versus Nigeria game instead of covering his job, which is MMA. Like, that's how big that game was. People were losing their minds about it on Twitter Saturday night. So, look, I don't get it. I feel like at some point, somebody's got to wake up. I'm a big believer, Brian, in basketball IQ, right? Somebody on the court has to call a timeout and tell Popovich to shut up, and Durant or Lillard or one of those guys in the huddle has to be like, all right, guys, listen up. Like, what they should have done? They should have put Jimmy Butler on the team. Like, Jimmy Butler should have been the guy on the team because everybody needs that jerk, okay? That bleep, okay? Who's going to turn around and just be like, you're an idiot, this is what we're going to do, let's go. I don't think they have that guy. Like, the dream teams of the 90s, they were full of those guys. They were full of these alphas who walked around and being like, shut up, this is what we're doing. I don't see that guy on this team right now.
Yeah, it would probably be Draymond, if anything, but, that probably works for some of the guys, but not others, especially because Draymond is just so limited offensively. Like, at least Jimmy Butler, he can play that role, but then he can also go drop 25. Draymond
and Durant have already clashed heads before, so Draymond's probably saving that energy for somebody else.
Yeah. He's waiting for the knockout round.
He's Bryan Toporek, the NBA podcast. He's the co-host Forbes Sports NBA contributor. Check out his work. Follow him on Twitter at B Toporek. And he joined us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, great stuff today. Enjoy the NBA Finals, and I'll be tuning into the pod.
Thank you, man. Always happy to come on.